Chapter 2. With hindsight, Tommy regretted falling asleep in jeans. It was bad enough that he woke up in a cold sweat, thanks to Dream and his nightmare-fueling mask. But waking up and not being able to feel his legs was where he drew the line. Rubbing the sleep out of his eyes, Tommy sat up and grabbed his notebook. Every time Dream visited, he updated his file on him. From the numerous visits, the prominent notes he always wrote down each time were, "Dream's still an asshole who exploits his godhood to annoy me. He won't take off that stupid mask." He didn't get why Dream wore it. He had seen his real face, and boy was he glad Dream covered it up. He wasn't ugly or anything, he kinda was, but it was more what his face represented, what that humanized person did to him in his first life. When Tommy was at his absolute lowest, hoping for someone to just care for him, and nope. No, it was because Dream was ugly underneath it. That was why he was glad. No other reason. Anyway, despite how Tommy would usually write that, he didn't this time. For once, in the void, Dream wasn't an asshole. But he wasn't nice either. It was creepy. How Dream seemed excited, almost happy at Tommy's recent predicament. Dream said this life would be more fun. He didn't specify who it would be fun for, me or him. But he kept laughing. It scared me. He must like the myth he picked for me. Tommy stopped writing and glanced at the clock on the bedside table. It was late morning. He'd rather not start the day with writing any more bullshit about the green bastard. Ignoring the aches in his legs, Tommy headed towards the bathroom. The sign saying, "Shitters be shitting" on the door made it clear. The door opened, and a tall body bumped into him. "Oh, good morning," Wilbur said. "Morning," he replied. He waited for Wilbur to move away from the bathroom, but he didn't. "I don't exactly know how to deal with children." If Tommy wasn't so tired, he would have beaten the shit out of him. And won, obviously. But that was just another thing to blame Dream for. "I'm not a fucking child." Exhibit A. "Shut up." Wilbur appeared amused at this entire thing. "Can you get out of my way so I can take a shit, or would you prefer watching me do it? Because if you take the second option, that's a bit weird of you." Exhibit B. It was too early for this shit. His stomach clenched in hunger. Maybe Wilbur could be useful. "Is your family the type to force everyone to sit down and have breakfast, or can I just take food and eat it upstairs?" he asked, not caring at Wilbur's surprise at the conversation change. "We used to have family meals." Wilbur threads his hands through his hair. "But yeah, I guess it would be convenient to have them again. Come downstairs in a bit, we can have breakfast." "Cool." Wilbur took that as his leave, and finally moved away from the bathroom. After Tommy finished his time in the bathroom, he walked down the stairs. They noticed his arrival in the kitchen. Phil greeted him as he made toast, wearing the greenest dressing gown Tommy had ever seen before. And Wilbur, unbothered, continued to grab jams from the top cupboard. He supposed the table with a cereal bowl in front of one of the chairs was the chosen table today. Fucking Tories and their two different types of dining tables. He didn't know if this family had a hierarchy of who sat in each chair, but he didn't care. He was sitting at the head of the table, and no one could do anything about it. His tiredness sabotaged his normal self-preservation. Wilbur sat to his right, and Phil to his left. Phil placed toast in the middle of the table. If awkward could be described as a moment, it would be this. Tommy acted on impulse half the time. Correction, all of the time. And did things without thinking. But in this house, he felt constant judgment. He didn't care about other people's opinions of him. That was a lie. Yet here, he weirdly did. Perhaps it was because this house was older. No younger siblings to take the attention off him. No crying babies to fill up the silence. He was the youngest, and he hated it. "How'd you sleep? You looked tired last night," Phil asked as Tommy put slices of toast onto his plate. "I slept all right. A bit hot, though. Suicide prevention windows will do that to you." Okay, maybe he needed to tone it down. The eyes practically bugging out of Phil's head were enough evidence for this. Wilbur choked on his cereal. "I need a drink." "No alcohol." "I don't think I can get through this conversation without it." To Tommy's dismay, Wilbur didn't grab alcohol from the fridge, which would have made this family breakfast even more entertaining. Instead, he grabbed a white Monster. At 10 o'clock in the morning? Techno chose this moment to come downstairs. Fortunately, he was no longer wearing the Minecraft pig slippers. "Oh, you're up early," Phil said to him. "I'm getting coffee at the cafe. Nikki has an early shift." White Monster still in hand, Wilbur shoved Techno by the shoulders into the seat next to him. "Nope. Sit your ass down and drink Dad's Poundland coffee. This is still a family breakfast." Poundland? Seriously? Hearing an American say that was the worst thing to ever happen in Tommy's life. Well, if you disregard the cycle of dying on his loved ones, which is pretty hard to disregard from his experience, then it was the worst. "I'm sorry that Walmart is on the opposite side of the world." Techno interrupted Phil with what Tommy assumed was an attempt at a bruh, but the lack of energy made it a pathetic groan. "Just because we have money doesn't mean Waitrose is the place to get coffee." Wilbur nodded, way too vigorously, in Tommy's opinion. "Yes, we need to humble ourselves. Living in a privileged neighborhood with no financial insecurity will go to our heads." "I could humble you right now by kicking you out of the house," Phil said. "You would never." Phil's lack of response caused Wilbur to take another painful sip of his drink. Tommy picked at his breakfast, not really knowing what to do. This didn't have an atmosphere of a family meal, or even a family at all. More like a group of friends with a family dynamic. But Tommy was the outsider here, watching in on their inside jokes. He could either join their banter and thrive off their awkwardness towards him, or eat the burnt toast. His stomach answered the dilemma for him. As Techno sluggishly got up to make coffee, Phil turned all his attention onto Tommy. "Since we're all here, it's a good time to get through the rules in this house." Tommy's legs bounced under the table. "It's nothing bad, just basic things. There are chores you'll need to do, but for now, since you're still getting settled, curfew is 9 o'clock. And tell me where you go beforehand, and no illegal shit." Wilbur's scoff wiped out Phil's serious demeanor in seconds. "Shut." Wilbur grinned at him. "Oh, yeah, and don't go in Wilbur's shed." "What's in his shed?" Tommy asked. "What, you like murderer or some shit?" Techno sat back down. "Would that be such a bad thing? Do I need to explain morality to you again?" This sounded like it was a common occurrence. Techno shrugged and stirred his coffee. Phil continued. "Anyway, Tommy, is there anything we can do to make you feel more welcome and comfortable? Ignoring anything Will and Techno say might help with that." Tommy narrowed his eyes at the man. He'd never been asked this before. He debated taking this seriously or not. "Child abuse and neglect makes me pretty uncomfortable, so maybe don't do that." The abruptness must have caught Techno off guard, seeing how he spat his coffee back into the cup. Phil sighed into his hands. "So you admit you're a child now," Wilbur said. "Only when it's convenient for me." "Mate, you don't have to worry about any of that in this house." Tommy looked over at Wilbur and Techno, who both gave him a thumbs up. That was not the response he expected. "Oh, also, we need to go shopping. I don't think one t-shirt and jeans are enough for you. Plus, you need other essentials." The memory of unwillingly vlogging a clothing haul came to his mind, and he'd rather die than go clothes shopping again. All thanks to the Morrison family. Can I do clothes shopping online? It was a weird request, but Phil, for some reason, didn't deny it. Yeah, that's fine. We'll go out for essential stuff later today. The rest of the family breakfast carried on in peace. Kinda. Apart from when Wilbur spilt his drink over the table, and Techno somehow dropped his toast on the floor. Car rides with Phil were more enjoyable than with Linda, which was ironic, as Tommy hated being in close quarters with the man who looked exactly like his father. Linda was that much of a dickhead. Tommy spent most of the journey staring out the window. Snowchester, despite having no snow, was pretty. Sorry if it's been awkward for you so far. We haven't fostered or adopted anyone since Techno, Phil said, disturbing Tommy's count of how many fucking trees this town had. He wanted to ask why Phil suddenly decided to foster again. There had to be a reason why. Maybe Techno wasn't the child he really wanted, but adopted anyway, hoping that he'd change. And because he never did, he'd try again with another child. Yet, Techno seemed cool enough. Maybe someone died and the house needed a replacement. Or the Crafts had a savior complex and desired to fix the most problematic children. Or they needed the money. Tommy quickly ruled this idea out, since Phil was about to spend money on him today. Instead, Tommy asked, "Is Techno his actual name?" "No, it's Technoblade III. "Fucking what? You're taking the piss." Tommy looked at him, trying to find anything in Phil's face to go up his bullshit meter. I wish I was. Not only is there one of them, but 3? Tommy couldn't grasp the idea of naming your child after a music genre and synonym for a knife. Take them all out. Why'd you think he was up for adoption? Oh. He shouldn't find this funny. Tommy, trying to find a sympathetic bone in his body, tried to bite back a laugh. Keyword tried. He burst out laughing, and Phil, surprisingly, joined in. Okay, this family was alright. When they reached the shopping center, Phil appeared more affected by the crowd than he did. But the poorly hidden glances Phil aimed in his direction made it obvious he was more worried about the effect it had on Tommy. To be honest, Phil didn't need to be concerned. Rather than having anxiety harrow in his chest, Tommy had the opposite. Tranquility composed his mind. He felt at home. The reason he was so calm was worrying, though. The environment of the sheer amount of people pushing and shoving reminded him of the battlefield. Surrounded by soldiers, shouts of patriarchy and revolution, a drawn weapon in his hand, fighting for freedom with his friends. If he closed his eyes and lost himself to the masses, he could almost picture his big brother leading them to victory, or rather, to their eventual deaths. Phil tugging on his arm broke him from this illusion. A piece of him wanted to stay there a little while more. But he knew that if he did, he'd remember a lot more than just the proud smile his brother gave him. You all right? Phil's voice drowned in the noise of the busy shopping center, but Tommy nodded at him anyway and blindly followed the man. The first shop was W.H. Smith's. There was not much that was interesting about buying pens that were priced more than they should be, besides the part where Phil laughed at his pain. He asked Tommy if he wanted a hot pink notepad. Nothing was wrong with pink, but hot pink was a vile fucking color. It was the color of a migraine, and absolutely didn't deserve the right to be a shade. Tesco's wasn't any better. Apparently, Lynx Africa wasn't a good deodorant to get, but Phil's disappointing stare didn't stop Tommy from buying it. So far, Phil hadn't spent that much money on him. He kept count of the amount, which was a habit he was never going to drop. Blame 2 past lives of poverty. Cheers, Dream, for that, you dick. But then Phil directed him over to the technology part of Tesco's, and the money amount skyrocketed. Phil wanted to buy Tommy a phone. A phone? Holy shit. Sure, he knew how phones worked, but he'd never had one to himself. His own privacy. You're a teenager, it's essential, Phil said, noticing the blatant shock on Tommy's face. As Phil sorted out his phone, Tommy made it his mission to touch every single piece of technology around him, even the gramophones. Anything with a screen or keyboard was at the mercy of Tommy Soot. Well, Tommy Adele in this life. I put everyone's numbers already in the contacts, in case you need any of us. Tommy immediately went to the messaging apps. Please don't tell me there's a family group chat. There is one, but it's just Wilbur sending Reddit links at 3 a.m. And that time we needed to find Techno when we lost him in the toy store. How old is he when that happened? That was last week. Despite being in the same position he was in on the car ride there, staring through the window, Tommy was less tense on the way back to the house. The close quarters bothered him, but not as much as it did before. It was more obvious to him now that Phil was not the same person as his father. The only similarity was his appearance, and nothing else. Still, though, the man made him nervous. The whole Foster family did. There were no red flags, besides the mystery around Wilbur's shed, and no absurd rules. It confused him. He should feel safe, but he didn't. Not completely. Phil offered to take Tommy's new things to his room when they got back, and told him to make himself some lunch. Now, Tommy was no chef, but he was an expert at making sandwiches. While eating the best fucking sandwich Tommy had ever made, he noticed Techno sitting on the sofa, furthest away from any social interaction, with a book in his hands and noise-canceling headphones on. Why did the fact that he, as a young adult, got lost in a toy store and was called Technoblade III add to his mysterious aura rather than take away from it? Regardless, next on the agenda was online shopping. Tommy stood outside Wilbur's room and dreaded knocking on it. So he just burst into the room unannounced. Phil said I can... A very manly scream cut him off. Look, he didn't mean to scare the shit out of Wilbur. Maybe he did, just a little bit. But Tommy took the American phrase, rip off the Band-Aid, literally. And that so happened to include jump-scaring tall men in their own bedrooms. What the fuck? Wilbur exclaimed, still recovering from the scare that knocked 20 years off his lifespan. Phil said I can use your PC to shop for clothes. Yeah, I know that, but why the fuck didn't you knock? Wilbur seemed to be milking this. The hand clasping over his heart was a bit too much. I'll keep that in mind next time. Anyway, PC time. As Wilbur turned on his computer, Tommy observed his room. Wilbur's room, to put it simply, was a fucking mess. Explosions could have gone off in here for all Tommy knew, and he had a lot of experience with that. There were water bottles scattered along the windowsill, all at different drinking levels, and a pile of clothes at the side of his bed. An acoustic guitar leaned against the wall, which was plastered with different indie and alternative band posters. A Hamilton poster was at the center. A picture frame laid facing down on his bedside table, right next to another bottle of water. Tommy sat at Wilbur's desk and waited for Wilbur to do something like sit on his bed or go downstairs. But nope. The fucker pulled out another chair and sat down next to him. You have no style. I'm helping. Think of this as charity work. I have style, Tommy said, offended. You need more than one shirt to prove you have style. Ignoring the outright lies, Tommy clicked on a new tab on Google. But he couldn't help but notice the other tabs that Wilbur had open. Specifically, the different tabs about accounts called Sally Salmon on Instagram, Facebook, and even Pinterest. Wilbur, why are you stalking someone called Sally? Wilbur rushed to close them all down and opened up a new window. You saw nothing. You simp. Shut the fuck up. As Wilbur's face became redder, Tommy found a clothes site that looked promising. Wilbur kept pestering him at every piece of clothing he clicked on. Thankfully, the red and white raglan t-shirt, which just resonated with him, survived Wilbur's attempts of deleting it from his basket. "You know, there's more to life than blue jeans," Wilbur said, probably because of how Tommy was browsing nothing but the jeans part of the bottom section. "You're right," Tommy replied, giving Wilbur just a piece of hope before destroying it all. "I want black jeans too." "For fuck's sake," Tommy smiled to himself. After he finished shopping and everything was bought, Wilbur was seconds away from dying of disappointment and shame. "What about merch? You like any musicians?" Tommy shook his head. "I don't really listen to music." That was the wrong answer. "Nope, no, get out of my fucking room. That was the last straw. We're done here. Just get out." Wilbur shoved him out, pushing harder when Tommy laughed. The door slammed shut on his face, and in his opinion, online shopping went well. He headed back into his room to see the shopping bags from earlier on the desk, but his heart stopped at the sight of the items that laid on the end of his bed. A school uniform. He had school tomorrow.